Hey there, it's Ryan, and welcome to Bedtime Horror Stories. Tonight, I've got something special for you. I'm about to tell you 5 of the creepiest, most spine-chilling tales you've ever heard. These aren't your average ghost stories, oh no. These are the kinds of stories that will make you question the safety of your own home, and maybe even peek over your shoulder while you listen. We're talking about haunted places, restless spirits, and dark corners that might just hold something, waiting. The kind of stories that'll send shivers crawling down your spine and make your heart race in the dead of night. Each one darker, more terrifying than the last. But there's one story I'm saving for last, and trust me, it's my absolute favorite. This final story is something else. It's the kind of tale that will haunt you long after it's over. You'll hear it, and you won't be able to stop thinking about it. It's the one that I can't shake from my own mind, and I'm dying to share it with you. So get cozy, dim the lights, and prepare for the thrill of a lifetime. These stories are about to take you to places you never thought possible. Ready? Let's dive in, but don't say I didn't warn you. Hello friends, my name is Ryan. I'm going to tell you a story named The Haunted Locket, a gift that brings only darkness, which is a very amazing story full of twists. So let's start. It was a cold, moonless night when Emma first laid eyes on the locket. She had been walking along the narrow, cobblestone streets of an old, sleepy town in the countryside. The wind howled through the trees, and the sound of footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. Emma had always been drawn to strange and mysterious things, but that night, her curiosity would lead her into something darker than she could ever have imagined. She was at the local market, tucked away in a small corner shop that smelled of incense and old books. Among the trinkets and curios, a locket caught her attention. It was a small, silver pendant, finely crafted with intricate patterns, but there was something odd about it. A cold chill seemed to emanate from it, as though it held a secret, a story waiting to be uncovered. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with eyes too sharp for his age, smiled as he saw her interest. "Ah, you found it," he said with a whisper, almost as if he had been expecting her. "This locket is special. It carries a curse, one that brings darkness to those who wear it. But it is also a gift, a powerful gift for the one who dares to claim it." Emma, intrigued but skeptical, asked him about the curse. He only shook his head, his expression growing somber. "Some things are better left untouched," he said. "But it is yours if you want it." Emma, unable to resist, bought the locket. Little did she know, this seemingly harmless purchase would change her life forever. The next few days were uneventful. Emma wore the locket, admiring its beauty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Strange dreams plagued her sleep, each one darker and more unsettling than the last. Faces she didn't recognize appeared to her in the dead of night, whispering secrets in a language she couldn't understand. She woke up each morning feeling exhausted, drained, as though something was pulling the very life out of her. It wasn't long before Emma began to notice the changes in herself. People she knew started acting strangely around her, as if they were avoiding her gaze or looking at her with fear. Her once peaceful life became a series of strange occurrences, flickering lights, whispers in the dark, and a growing sense of dread that gnawed at her every waking moment. The locket seemed to be drawing her into its grip, and the more she wore it, the more she felt an unshakable sense of darkness creeping into her life. One night, unable to sleep, Emma found herself walking through the woods behind her house, the locket heavy around her neck. She had heard rumors of strange happenings in the woods, of lost souls and vengeful spirits. But she had never believed them, not until that night. As she walked deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, echoing all around her. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing in the distance, just beyond the trees. At first, it looked like a shadow, but as she drew closer, she saw that it was a woman. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes shone with an eerie, otherworldly glow. The woman spoke, her voice a soft, chilling whisper. "You have taken the locket, haven't you?" she asked. "Do you not know what it holds?" Emma froze, fear gripping her heart. "What do you mean?" she stammered. "What is this locket? Why is it cursed?" The woman's eyes darkened, and her voice grew even softer, barely a breath against the wind. The locket was a gift once, but it became a prison. A prison for a soul bound by a curse. Whoever wears the locket will be drawn into the darkness, just as I was. With that, the woman vanished, leaving Emma alone in the woods, trembling. She turned and ran, not stopping until she was safely back in her home, the locket still hanging around her neck, its cold touch more suffocating than ever. The days that followed were filled with terror. Emma's life spiraled out of control as the locket's curse took hold. She began seeing visions of the woman in her dreams, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. The whispers became louder, more urgent, until they consumed her thoughts entirely. She couldn't escape the feeling that the locket was drawing her into its world, a world of darkness and despair. Desperate for answers, Emma returned to the market where she had first found the locket, hoping to find the shopkeeper who had sold it to her. But the shop was gone. The once familiar street was now a deserted alley, with nothing but shadows lurking in every corner. She searched for hours, but there was no trace of the old shop or its owner. In her search, Emma stumbled upon an old journal, hidden beneath the floorboards of the empty alley. It was the journal of a woman who had once owned the locket, a woman who had been cursed by its power. As Emma read through the journal, she learned of the locket's true origins. It was created by an ancient cult, meant to bind the soul of a powerful witch to the wearer. The witch's spirit would feed on the wearer's life force, slowly consuming them until they were nothing more than a shell, trapped in the curse forever. Emma realized that she had been doomed the moment she put on the locket. The darkness that had begun to creep into her life was the witch's spirit, feeding on her, taking her soul bit by bit. But she refused to give in. With newfound resolve, Emma decided to destroy the locket. She gathered the few belongings she had left and set out to find a way to break the curse. She sought out an old healer, a woman who was said to have knowledge of the supernatural. The healer, upon seeing the locket, grew pale and warned Emma of the consequences. But it was too late. Emma had already made up her mind. The healer performed a ritual to destroy the locket, but as the flames consumed it, a terrible scream echoed through the room. The witch's spirit was released, but it was not freed. Instead, it turned on Emma, its rage consuming her. The darkness that had been bound to the locket now had no form, no boundaries. It spread like a shadow, filling the air, suffocating everything in its path. In the end, Emma was lost to the darkness, her soul consumed by the curse of the haunted locket. And though the locket was destroyed, its power lingered, waiting for the next soul to claim it. And friends, that's how the haunted locket, a gift that promised power, brought only darkness to those who dared to possess it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more spine-chilling tales like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on our channel. Let's try to uncover more mysteries together, every day. Hello friends, my name is Ryan, and today I am going to tell you a story named The Dark Watcher, Eyes That Follow You Even in Sleep, which is a truly amazing tale, full of twists and suspense. So, let's begin. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your ears, making you aware of every tiny sound. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside, but the stillness inside the house felt eerie, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. There was something off about tonight, something unspoken that made even the bravest souls uneasy. And then, there was Thomas. He had just moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, looking for a fresh start after a difficult year. The house was beautiful, yet it felt like it had secrets lurking in its dark corners. When he first walked through the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something just out of reach, yet so present that it made his skin crawl. The first few nights were uneventful, but it wasn't long before strange things began to happen. The soft creak of the floorboards when no one was around. The flickering lights. And most unsettling of all, the sensation of eyes on him, always, even when he was alone. One evening, as he sat by the fireplace, a peculiar chill swept through the room. Thomas tried to ignore it, brushing it off as the draft from the cracked windows. But deep inside, something gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was observing his every move. It was the kind of sensation that made you glance over your shoulder, expecting to catch a glimpse of someone there, only to find nothing but shadows. On the fourth night, the unease escalated. Thomas awoke in the middle of the night, his heart pounding. The room was dark, and the only sound was his breathing. But there it was again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He sat up quickly, his eyes darting around the room. His gaze stopped at the corner, where the shadows seemed to shift in an unnatural way. The figure was barely discernible, but there, standing in the corner, watching him. Thomas tried to call out, but his throat felt tight, as though something was blocking his voice. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stared at him, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. He could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe, to think. When morning came, he convinced himself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. That night, he decided to stay awake, determined to catch whoever, or whatever, had been lurking in his room. As the hours passed, the darkness seemed to grow heavier. At exactly 3 a.m., the temperature dropped, and the sensation of being watched returned. Thomas tried to keep his eyes open, but they were heavy, so heavy that he fought to stay awake. It was as though something was pulling him into a deep, restless sleep. But even in that half-conscious state, he could feel it, the presence. The eyes. Suddenly, a sound broke through the silence. A soft whisper, just barely audible, like a breath on the back of his neck. "I see you," it said. The voice was cold, hollow, and filled with malice. His heart raced, and he turned his head sharply, but there was nothing there. His breath came in ragged gasps as he leapt out of bed, his body trembling with fear. He turned on every light in the house, desperate to rid himself of the darkness that seemed to crawl through the walls. But no matter how brightly the lights burned, the feeling of being watched never left. The eyes, those piercing eyes, were always there, in the corners of his vision, lurking in the shadows. Days turned into weeks, and Thomas began to unravel. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think clearly. He was no longer sure if he was awake or dreaming. The figure, the watcher, had become a constant presence in his life, its gaze following him even when his eyes were closed. It was as if it had seeped into his very soul, its presence inescapable, suffocating. One night, in a desperate bid to end the torment, Thomas researched the house's history. What he uncovered chilled him to the bone. The house had been built over an old cemetery, and years ago, a family had lived there, people who had vanished without a trace. Whispers around town spoke of a curse that hung over the property, of a dark force that preyed upon those who dared to stay too long. But the most terrifying detail he found was about the Watcher, a malevolent spirit that had once haunted the family, following them wherever they went, even into their dreams. Desperate for answers, Thomas sought out a local psychic, hoping for some kind of relief. She told him something that made his blood run cold. The eyes that follow you are not just a spirit, but a curse. It feeds on fear, grows stronger with every passing day. And unless you confront it, it will never leave. But what could he do? How could he face something that had already invaded his life so completely? In his darkest moment, Thomas made a choice. He would confront the Watcher. He would face the eyes that followed him. Armed with only a flashlight and his own trembling resolve, he ventured into the heart of the house at midnight. The shadows seemed to bend and stretch as he walked through the halls, the air thick with an unseen presence. The deeper he went, the colder it became. And then, in the farthest corner of the house, he saw it, the Watcher. Its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, fixed on him, unmoving. "I see you," it whispered again, but this time, it was louder, closer. But Thomas didn't flinch. With every ounce of strength he had left, he stepped forward, determined to break the curse. He raised the flashlight, shining it directly into the figure's eyes, and as the light touched its gaze, something shifted. The air grew still, the room silent, and for the first time, the Watcher's presence seemed to wane. But as the darkness receded, Thomas knew the truth: he hadn't defeated the Watcher. It had simply gone into hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. And when it did, he would be ready. He had become a part of the curse now, bound by the very eyes that followed him, even in his sleep. And so, my friends, the story ends with a chilling realization. The watcher still lingers in that house, its eyes waiting to find the next soul to torment. But who will it be? Will you be the next one to experience the eyes that follow you, even in sleep? If you want to hear more of these spine-tingling stories, be sure to subscribe to our channel, where we bring you more tales that will leave you questioning what's real and what's not. Stay tuned, and remember, the dark is always watching. Hello friends, my name is Ryan, and I'm going to tell you a story named The Cursed Painting, an artwork that doesn't want to be forgotten, which is a very amazing story full of twists. So, let's start. It was a rainy evening when I first came across the painting. I had just moved into an old, creaky house on the edge of town. The place was cheap, a little too cheap for my liking, but it had something eerie about it, something that called out to me. The house itself seemed to have a life of its own, whispering secrets through the cracks in the walls and the drafts that shivered through the hallways. But the real mystery began when I stumbled upon the painting in the attic. The moment I saw it, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't just the age of the painting, which was clearly centuries old, nor the unsettling look in the eyes of the woman painted on it. It was something else, something that seemed to breathe life into the canvas itself. The woman in the painting stared directly at me, her eyes following my every movement. Her expression was one of sorrow, but beneath that sorrow, there was a dark, unsettling energy. I tried to turn away, but her gaze kept pulling me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that the painting was more than just a piece of art. It felt alive. I told myself it was just my imagination. The house was old, after all. Old houses do strange things to people. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something strange. A whisper. Faint at first, like the rustling of a leaf in the wind, but then clearer. It was a woman's voice, whispering in my ear. "Remember me," the voice murmured. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, looking around the dark room. The whispering stopped. My breath was heavy, but the house was still. I thought it was just a nightmare, but when I went to check on the painting the next morning, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The woman's eyes were no longer looking at me from the painting. They were looking at the doorway, as if waiting for someone. Waiting for me. Days passed, and I couldn't get the painting out of my mind. Every time I walked past it, I felt like something was pulling me toward it, like it was calling me. I told myself it was just a painting, just some old artwork left behind by the previous owner, but deep down, I knew it was something more. One evening, unable to resist any longer, I found myself standing in front of the painting again. I reached out to touch it, my fingers hovering just inches away from the canvas. As soon as my fingers brushed against the surface, the room seemed to darken. The air grew thick, and the whisper returned. "Help me," the voice said, louder this time, urgent. I recoiled, stumbling backward. The painting, it had changed. The woman's face was twisted in anguish now, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes were filled with terror. It was then that I realized the truth. The painting wasn't just cursed, it was a prison. The woman in the painting wasn't just some figure from the past, she was trapped. Trapped by the painting, trapped by whatever dark force had bound her to it. And now, she was reaching out, trying to make contact with the world beyond the frame. I spent the next few days researching the painting's origins, desperate for any clue that could help me understand what was happening. What I found sent a chill down my spine. The painting was created centuries ago by an artist named Alistair Vance, a man known for his dark, almost forbidden works of art. It was said that Vance had created the painting as a way to trap a powerful spirit, an ancient entity that had been haunting him for years. The spirit, however, was far more powerful than Vance had anticipated. It didn't just want to be contained. It wanted freedom. And so, it cursed the painting, ensuring that anyone who came into contact with it would be drawn into its web, slowly becoming a part of the painting's twisted world. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know if I was strong enough to do it. The painting had already begun to affect me. The whispering had grown louder, the darkness more consuming. I could feel the pull, the cold fingers of the entity reaching for me. It wanted me. It wanted to make me part of its world. That night, I made a decision. I would burn the painting. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. I dragged the painting out to the backyard, the wind howling around me, as if warning me to stop. But I didn't listen. I struck the match, and the flames leaped up, consuming the canvas. For a moment, nothing happened. The flames danced in the night, the painting reduced to ash. But then, the air grew still. And in the silence, I heard it. The whisper. "You can't escape me." I turned around to see the woman standing behind me, her eyes now hollow, her face twisted into a grotesque smile. The painting had not been destroyed. It had merely changed form. The curse had not been broken. It had only found a new way to reach me. I ran, but the shadow of the woman followed me. No matter how far I went, no matter how fast I ran, she was always there, always watching, always whispering. And now, as I tell you this story, I can feel her presence again, lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting for the moment when she can finally claim me. So, my friends, I warn you, if you ever come across a painting like this, turn away. Don't let its gaze meet yours. Because once it does, there's no escaping its curse. And before I end this story, I want to remind you all to subscribe to my channel, Let's Try Everyday, where I'll be bringing you more stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. Hello friends, my name is Ryan. I'm going to tell you a story named The Living Room, a room that changes every time you look away, which is a very amazing story full of twists, so let's start. It was an ordinary evening when I first stepped into the house. The kind of house you'd pass by without a second glance, nestled at the end of a narrow street. The house seemed quiet, as if it held its breath, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. My curiosity was piqued when I was invited by an old friend, Alex, who had recently moved into the house. We sat in the living room, the heart of the house. It was a typical room with a couch, coffee table, and a fireplace, but there was something oddly off about it. The furniture, the decorations, they felt out of place. It wasn't anything too strange, but it had that subtle feeling that you couldn't quite shake. As we talked, I noticed something peculiar. Every time I turned my head away for even a second and then looked back at the room, it seemed to have shifted. The couch would be in a different spot, or the pictures on the wall would change. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the lighting, the shadows, who knew what was happening? But then, it happened again. Alex seemed completely unfazed, like this was just normal. He noticed my confusion and chuckled, "You're seeing it too, aren't you?" I nodded, unsure of how to respond. What is happening here?" I asked. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "The room changes, Ryan. Every time you look away, it shifts. And no one really knows why." His words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I looked around, trying to make sense of what he had just said. There had to be a logical explanation. A prank, maybe? But something deep inside me told me this was far beyond any normal trick. Alex continued, "You won't believe the stories people tell about this room. Some say it's haunted, others think it's just a weird quirk of the house. But the truth? Well, the truth is something else entirely." As the night went on, the changes became more pronounced. At first, it was just a shift in furniture or pictures. But then, I noticed something else. The room seemed to start reflecting different moods. At one point, the air grew colder, the walls closing in. The next, it felt expansive, like a grand ballroom. Each time I blinked, I was in a different version of the same room. I wanted to get up and leave, but I felt rooted to the spot, as if the room itself held me in place. Alex seemed oblivious to the growing tension, as if he had lived with it for years and had become numb to it. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore the creeping sense that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The entire room went dark, and I heard a soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the shadows. "Don't leave," it said. "You'll never leave." I froze, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if it was my mind playing tricks, but I could have sworn I felt eyes watching me from every corner. The room was alive, changing and shifting, playing with me. I turned to Alex for reassurance, but when I looked at him, his face was different. His eyes, wide with fear, stared back at me. You have to get out. It's not safe, he whispered, his voice trembling. Before I could ask him what he meant, the room changed once again. The walls began to close in, the furniture twisting and bending, becoming unrecognizable. I could feel the room pressing against me, suffocating me. Panic rose within me as I realized this wasn't just some trick of the mind, it was real. The room was alive, and it wasn't going to let me leave. I stumbled toward the door, but it was no use. The door had disappeared, replaced by a wall of cold stone. The windows, once offering a glimpse of the outside world, were now nothing more than dark, impenetrable glass. I was trapped. "Ryan," Alex's voice echoed in the chaos. "Don't look away. If you do, it changes again. Don't blink." But it was too late. My gaze shifted, and the room began to transform once more. This time, the furniture became monstrous, and the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. Shadows danced in the corners, and strange figures moved just out of sight. I realized then that there was no escaping this room. It would keep changing, shifting, twisting, as long as I remained here. I could hear whispers, laughter, and distant screams from the walls. The room wasn't just a physical space, it was a prison, a living entity that fed on fear, confusion, and helplessness. The whispers grew louder, urging me to stay, to embrace the chaos. But I couldn't. I fought to keep my mind intact, to find a way out. But deep down, I knew there was no way out. The room had already claimed me. I don't know how long I was trapped in that room. It could have been hours, days, or even longer. Time had lost all meaning. The room changed endlessly, each shift more terrifying than the last. Eventually, I realized that the room had become a part of me, its shifting walls, its ever-changing nature, all woven into my very being. I'm telling you this story now because you need to understand, this room is real. It's out there, waiting for someone to step inside. And once you do, once you see it, you'll never be able to leave. It will change, it will twist, and it will keep you locked in its grasp forever. So, before you go, I have one final piece of advice. If you ever come across a house like the one I entered, with a living room that changes every time you look away, run. Run as fast as you can, and never look back. Because if you do, you might end up just like me, trapped forever. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Join me in the dark corners of the unknown, and let's explore the mysteries together.